Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Teach, Sleep, Repeat. My name is Dylan.
And my name is Hayden.
Hayden, how are you feeling this morning?
I'm fine.
When?
What do you mean when?
When are you fine?
I'm fine this morning.
Thank you. Put that into your answer, please. How am I supposed to know unless you say this morning in the answer to the question that I told you?
Dylan, funnily enough, you said this morning in your question.
I don't think that's relevant. I think I'm separating out the really good people who can do inference with the people who can't, actually, because you've not put it into your answer.
Right. Are you okay?
Yeah, I just maybe been reading the English Smart Scheme guidance. Let's try again. Let's try again. Let's try again. So, Hayden, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
This morning, I had toast.
Had what? Toast for what?
For breakfast.
No, for throwing out the window. How am I supposed to know what you did with the toast unless you put it into the answer to my question?
Oh, welcome to this episode where we are going to dive into the sats with the wonderful Sophie Bartlett in not too long. And
she's so good.
Taking a mick there, Dylan.
Yeah.
Are you out the English Mark scheme?
Yeah, I just listen. We're gonna dive into it, but just is that not insane? Is that not insane?
Yeah.
You have to reference what's in the question in order to show comprehension of something. Imagine real life conversations if that was how it was.
Yeah.
It would be like that.
Yeah.
Hey Hayden, what did you have for breakfast this morning?
For breakfast this morning, have I got it all right so far?
Yes, I think so.
For breakfast this morning, I had toast with butter.
Oh, sorry, time's up. That's just took too long. No one's listening to you after that. Anyway, guys, oh my goodness, we're going to dive into everything to do with the recent SATS papers. Sophie's written some unbelievable blogs, analysis about what the question domains are that have come up, and then we're going to dive into specific questions that have caused uproar. Because I think there's a spectrum. I think there are a bunch of questions where the mark scheme and the extra guidance in particular is just extremely harsh for what we can say a 10 or 11-year-old is understanding a comprehension question or not. But, in general, I think the tests were quite good, but I don't want to get ahead of myself here. You can go to our chat immediately with Sophie B if that's what you're here for. But first of all, Hayden, I do want to know, you are a year 6 teacher.
I am.
You have gone through the SATs process with your children. You are basically doing absolutely nothing now. SATs are over, clearly, just spending all day. I think, wasn't it? Rounders all day in the field. Oh gosh, that's hard. That's taxing. And then the next day, I think you just were in the hall listening to children sing.
Yeah, well, Dylan, it is performance season, right? The year 6s famously, just because you're not in our world, Dylan, we do performance, at most schools these days.
I think it's a good thing. Jokes aside, I like the performance aspect. I just think that you're getting an easy ride and not having to do any work. That's it, guys. I don't know.
Look,
that's what I'm saying.
The year 6 narrative is this. We did 6 terms worth of hard work in 5. We worked so much harder than you, Dylan, whilst you were doing nothing in lower school. What were you even doing?
Yeah, just colouring in, actually.
Yeah,
all
just
day.
colouring.
That's obviously
Classic, making mac and cheese.
But
That's what my uncles always say. They always say to me, what have you been doing this week at school? Been making some mac and cheese with the kids.
Put some string through some uncooked macaroni.
I'm like, pretty
much.
much.
You know what I did, actually? I did some artwork with some macaroni. It was good. It was fun. Yeah, it was enjoyable.
Fair enough.
Why don't you join teaching if it's so easy?
Yeah. Oh, I wonder. That's the best rhetoric, isn't it? Anyway, performance, right? One thing I want to say about that, because obviously we've started now. We've done the auditions. You mentioned last week that you walked past and they were all auditioning.
Oh, yeah. It was fantastic.
Singing. And it was all good fun. But we're now at the bit where we actually have to cast them.
Sure.
So, like most school plays, by the way, like you kind of get one that's tailored towards your sort of size. Obviously, if you've got a 1-form entry school, you've got 32 kids, you can't have a play with 65 parts in it.
No, but it's probably easier at 1-form to kind of give children more larger roles, for example. Yeah,
100%. Whereas we're a 3-form, so we've got around 90 odd kids, right? 96 is our max, and this play, it's done a good job, right? It has a good like 50 roles in it, like actually on stage.
I'm just doing some maths quick.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a shortfall.
Yeah, so a lot of kids don't want to do it. They just want to make props, or they want to do like the lighting. We have computer assistants, so we have other roles that are not on stage.
So every child has a role.
Every child always has a role, right? But the problem comes down to this part. In any good show, there's only realistically going to be 4, 5, 6 like main roles at a push.
Sure.
If you're really trying to like force some big roles into the show. And with school plays, they normally do like 4, 5, 6. But the problem is there's never 6 kids that want those roles and precisely the roles that you'll give them, Dylan. What happens is 20 children all want one of the main 6 roles, and 20 children are probably relatively suitable. Maybe a few of them not quite suited, and you're down to 14.
Sure.
And you have to pick. And what happens every year, and I'm dreading it now because we're in this little window now, is unfortunately not every kid gets the exact role they want. Some kids are completely fine with it. They get over it because they're like, yeah, that's just part of life, obviously. Other kids go home and obviously get a bit upset. And then you get some parents who come in and they complain. And I'm anticipating now. I'm like, oh no, I don't want any upset parents to come in and be like, why has my child not got this role? And it's just like,
But do you not think that's the way that schools do it in terms of you have to let some children down, right? That's a good thing to do, isn't it? In terms of, okay, it's not good to make a child upset before someone clips this and says, "Oh, do you think the child should be upset?" No, I think it's good that child gets rejection in some aspect because they're not going to get everything they want in their life. Yeah. And if they're really super upset about it, in my opinion, the problem comes with the reaction of the parent. If the reaction of the parent is to storm into school and say, "My child wanted this," it's like, great, well done. So did 7 others.
Yep.
And 5 of them aren't storming in and 1 of them got it. So I think that, from a school's point of view, what would be your reaction to that in terms of if a parent was really unhappy with something like that?
I mean, for me personally, obviously I can't speak for everyone at the
sure,
school.
But what would
how
you think? Yeah.
I would find it really awkward because I would probably just I'd be annoyed by it. Like personally, I'd be a bit like
annoyed that they thought they could.
Yeah, I'd feel like I'd be like, come on. I'd want to say that's a bit entitled, isn't it? It's a little bit entitled, isn't it? But obviously you can't say that. You've got to remain professional. So it's a challenging conversation.
I'm a podcast.
No, but that's like ultimately like there's no.
So you wouldn't change it, is what I'm saying?
No, I know, absolutely not. Like I wouldn't. If there was a legitimate reason, I can't think of a legitimate reason right now. But if there was like some obvious legitimate reason where that we've just not thought of this thing, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, but they have to change it for this reason. Then you just would like, there's no pride in this. But if they're just saying my kid wanted it as well, I'm like, okay,
I know
cool.
they did.
Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, we gave it to this child. Do you want me to tell you in front of you and your child that other kid was better?
Right.
Like, do you really want me to say that? Like, what?
But also, if I was a parent of a child who came home and wasn't casting something, I would say to my child, well, they were probably better suited for it.
Yeah.
And it's okay for you to understand that there are other people who are better at certain things than you are. There's something you're better than them at, probably. I hope. Anyway, with my child, I hope there's something to be better at. But there will be, jokes aside, there will be something they're better at. It's just not playing the lead role in this play.
Just imagine you with Rory when he's older going that bit further and saying, like, it's unnecessary. And actually, that child is probably better than you at maths, English, sport. In fact, of course they were picked, son. Have you said they're better than you at everything? It's just, why are you telling me this, Dad? Yeah, of course not. But what you're alluding to here is the whole life lesson of, yes, you don't always get what you want all the time. And
precisely.
I know there's lots of criticisms about how culture is getting a bit more
participation
awards, and you can't. We couldn't possibly upset anyone. And I don't know, we're not like steadfast. No. We were talking about the Michaela school, and we're kind of criticizing that recently in a conversation. We'll go into the whole conversation about that another time, and saying how there's probably too far the other way as well, where you can be extremely strict, and actually, there's not really great for kids, but. There is a middle ground somewhere. I just don't even think it's strict to cast people in a play. I just reject the notion it's on this spectrum. Yeah. It's just a part of life where you won't get chosen for this or you will. Participation awards in Sports Day. Yeah, they happen in some schools. Okay, but I don't think it's like an inherent problem here where most schools you get winners and losers. Yeah, you won the race. Well done. Like I think it's a made up problem. Yeah, we make it deeper than it is.
What would you say then if a year 4 teacher went to maybe SLT and said, it's just not fair. All of year 6 are doing hardly any work now. They're doing nothing. All of term 6, they just get to sit on the field all day.
I'd say year what? I don't know who year 4 is. What is this a relevant area of our school? What's happening? Sorry, what's year 4?
I'm joking. I know. Look, I think it's the right thing to do to focus a bit more on things like this now that you can. And we're going to talk about with Sophie later, for example, what do you do with the strands where you're not particularly teaching it because it might not come up on the test. You should still be teaching it right now. So, still do some English, still do some math, etc. We'll talk all about that in general. But I just wanted to talk about one thing before we go into this deep dive of the analysis of the SATs papers, because I think it'll be very easy for anyone clicking on this for the first time. Maybe that's you coming here to listen to Sophie.
Hey,
hello. Maybe they could leave a review. I don't know, a 5-star review somewhere. Maybe if they enjoyed this chat, or they could follow us, etc. Either way, I just want to make it really clear. We're going to dive into the SATs because they exist. So we're going to talk about the pros, the cons, and what the mark scheme says, etc.
Yeah.
But you were very keen to do this as well, just to let people know, look, there is a separate conversation here to be had about the efficacy of SATs themselves.
Yeah.
So where do you sit with that?
That's what, all I want to do is just set the stage slightly, because a lot of people, like you said, maybe not listened to our opinions before and wouldn't know that we have had whole conversations about SATs overall and how we feel like there's, we're not sat here as like super pro SATs. Basically, when you hear us talking about these papers for this year, we're just making comparisons, talking about what was good, what was bad within the constraints. I don't really think SATs are the be all and end all. I don't think they're that important. I don't think we should be overemphasizing them with the kids. I don't think they're necessarily good for kids' mental health. I think there's a whole discussion there. I just want to make that clear really before we have this conversation, because we're not really going to talk about that with Sophie. We're going to talk about the 2025 papers. Okay.
Yeah. And one thing just to add to that is I think there's a whole discussion again that I don't think there's anything wrong with testing children. In year 4, I know year 4 does exist. exist, Hayden, and we do test children in year 4 as well. But it's not a government kind of rollout.
It's not important.
Table.
Yeah,
okay, well, that's another way of putting it. Anyway, I do think there's value in testing children and what they've understood. I think there's a big discussion to be had somewhere about where that line of difficulty is. I don't think we necessarily get too much into that with our chat with Sophie, but I do think maybe in general that line's quite high. You know, we are blocking out maybe some EAL learners, some children with additional needs, etc.
Yeah, sure.
I don't always think that the extra kind of what's it called, where you apply for extra access arrangements. I don't necessarily think they always hit the nail on the head for what a child actually needs in terms of being able to access these tests. I think they help to a degree, but what's an extra 15 minutes if you just don't understand what the words mean? You know, and I get we're judging that as well, but I think there's lots of drawbacks, is what I'm saying. I think there's lots of discussions to be had, which are outside of this chat we're about to have. So if you do have any of those thoughts in general, do get in touch with us, because we're very interested to hear what you think. Yeah. But I think we should dive straight in.
Yeah, with that in mind, let's talk to Sophie.
Hello, Sophie. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you guys?
I'm good. I'm excellent, because the SATs are all over now. We've had that big kind of I get to read Sophie B's blogs all about these SATs and how they've gone on.
That's what you live for, isn't it?
Yeah. Can I just say how I love your blogs? There are loads of blogs now. Loads of people do analysis and stuff. But I must say, the way you write...
He reads all of them.
Yeah, Hayden gets through all of them. He sits there, locks himself in a little room, just reading away.
I do. Yeah.
But yours are so well written, and they read like a short novel, and I just love it. So we're going to whack all the links and things to that down there. But the point today is, if you don't want to do all that reading for whatever reason, we're going to go through all of the SATs and the analysis and what was in the papers and all that good stuff. So I guess the first question is just headline. How did you think they were written? Do you think they were good papers in general? What was your generic view of them overall?
I actually feel like it's a controversial opinion that this has been my favourite set so far since the new curriculum. I mean, my opinion's changed slightly since the mark schemes have come out, but not like there's always frustrations with the mark scheme, but the actual papers themselves I kind of quite liked. I thought they were my favourite set. I don't know how you feel, Hayden.
I feel exactly the same. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised when I went through all the papers. Obviously, like maths, English, all of it. I thought, wow, whoever wrote these did a really good job. And like you said, then I saw the mark schemes and I was like, wow, whoever wrote these did a terrible job. So we'll dive into that as we go through, I think, a bit more. But
yeah, I think we should probably, let's go through each kind of individual aspect one at a time. So we'll go through reading comprehension, then we'll do some GPS, and then we'll go through maths, just to kind of break it up a bit.
Yeah.
So starting with English and the English papers, I just want to start off with the point you two just made, that I think both of you read this, and initially when the children were doing it, both of you thought, actually, this is quite a good paper. It's accessible. And I think the one thing, Sophie, that jumped out for me is you actually thought they were interesting texts.
I know. I don't know whether I was just that bored that I was like, oh, this is actually quite interesting. But I thought compared to some of the others, and considering as well that, I mean, the second two came from real life texts. I mean, the third one, arguable, the style was quite archaic, I guess. But I actually really enjoyed the middle one particularly. I was quite intrigued by that one. I thought it was written really nicely as well and quite engaging for children. And there's always going to be a non-fiction, and non-fiction being interesting is subjective, isn't it? If you're not into chess or you're not into the history of someone's success, then you're not going to find it interesting. But I thought they were all right, to be honest.
Me too. I genuinely thought the texts were quite good. Like some years they're a little bit boring. I think they're all, they're never going to appeal to every single person, are they? Like I saw some online immediately afterwards were like, it was boring, wasn't it? Boring text, classic. We're not getting the kids engaged. And I was like, well, I think they were all right. I think a lot of my kids quite enjoyed it, actually.
Yeah.
However, I did have a bet with my class because they were, super in the zone before SATs, and they all bet that poetry was going to come up. What did you feel the same way? Were you surprised?
Seriously, it's been since 2018 now that it hasn't, and now a few people are saying, I've seen a few comments on social saying like, they're just not going to include it because they can't make up the word count that they should have with a poem. Because if they put a poem, that means one of the other texts has got to be really meaty.
Right.
But I'm not sure that would be the case. And then the other one was, someone said, oh, but the mark scheme would just be so difficult if we had a poem. Hello. The mark scheme. Anyway, inferring a poem is really not that much. Like, there's still the same variety of answers as when inferring a fiction text. So I don't think that's the reason. I just think they're just being annoying.
But has there been much? I remember looking at your blog. Has there been much variation in like the order of the text in the years. I think what was it this year? It was a non-fiction, fiction,
and
then fiction. I feel like that's been the same for a few years.
So last year that was the same, and then the 3 years before that it was fiction, non-fiction in the middle, fiction.
Right.
But the whole time, fiction has been the hardest one. So since 2017, 16, 17, fiction's been the third text.
Yeah. So in general, in terms of what's actually in the paper, then, if we look at like the content domains, I think this is where your analysis really does do it for me, because I love stats and numbers and things like this. You've kind of broken down what domains come up and what domains don't. I think there are 8, aren't there, in total, in terms of 2A, 2B, retrieval. And what does strike me is this year, it just like every other year, if not, it feels like even more so, they just leave out so many strands and so heavily weight towards retrieval, inference, word meaning, etc. What's your view on that in general? Like, did it fit in with previous years, and do you think that's a fair split when you're judging a child's comprehension level?
Well, so this year, like last year, they had no prediction questions, but then I guess that kind of makes sense. There's not really, you can't, again, prediction is really subjective, although they've clearly decided other things are objective and can be marked. But prediction question only came up in 2022. Literally no other time has a prediction question come up. Inference is the biggest it's ever been. So nearly half the questions, 48% of the marks were on inference this year. That's the biggest it's ever been. And retrieval's always quite chunky. But to be fair, I was looking through the test framework, so the parameters that the test writers have to stick to, and inference was always intended to be one of the biggest ones, as well as retrieval, and the others were always supposed to be quite small. So, I mean, looking at the underrepresented ones, you've got prediction, explaining how meaning is enhanced through words, making comparisons within the text. They're like important things, but I guess they're harder to write questions on and harder to mark. I don't know.
It's the same every year, isn't it? Like you said, I just find that they're so underrepresented.
Oh, should we have another strand? How to pronounce words properly?
No, get rid of that strand. I find that like it almost discourages you from even like bothering. I know it sounds really silly. Obviously, as a teacher, you're going to teach everything, but like it does like massively encourage you to be like, let's just look at retrieval, word meaning, and inference. Like nothing else really matters according to the test.
But I think the other thing it forces, sorry, Dylan, it forces people in doing is doing like, well, I'm just going to do loads of lessons on inference and loads of lessons on retrieval, as if you can teach inference as a like discrete standalone thing, which obviously isn't great kind of a pedagogical approach to it. No. But I was surprised by how huge the chunk, and then I think a lot of people kind of noticed it without knowing the analysis, that there were loads of inference questions this year.
You see it straight away. The thing I was going to say on that, what both of you are saying is absolutely right, and it kind of bleeds into how people end up teaching. But do you also find that it's still worth teaching things like prediction and summary, etc., not only because of the pure kind of skill of doing that to build someone who's better at comprehension, but also because I feel like those strands really do bleed into each other quite a lot. Like if you're predicting things, then you inherently have to know what words mean. Because if you're making a prediction based on the text, it's because you understand what the authors describe someone's personality like. And I think a big thing for me, maybe as we move into now looking at the questions that kind of jumped out and the mark schemes in particular, I found that what you mentioned in terms of retrieval and word meaning, for example, there were so many questions where, maybe it was categorized as straight up retrieval, but you had to have an understanding of what the words meant in order to know that that's the information you need to retrieve. So I think it's useful looking at these percentages, etc. But I do find in general, and maybe in your opinion, was it more so this year, that you did need to have kind of an overarching, comprehension skill set and able to answer even the most simple questions?
Yeah, I think because, I mean, and I fall into this pit before, in that teaching retrieval, you're kind of just looking for exactly that word or that fact in the text. And I think it was was it question 1? I'm just looking now at my blog.
It was question 1, yeah.
Yeah, question 1 was a retrieval question, but it wasn't a straightforward. So the word in the question is, the question is, how did Fiona make money for her family? And in the text, the answer, you'd find the answer in the sentence that said her family could no longer afford to send her, so she had to support her family. So apart from the word family, which is actually throughout quite a lot of the text, you had to look at basically synonyms of the word. So I thought, I actually don't know if that's a retrieval question until I see the mark scheme. It might be a word choice question or something, but it was a retrieval one, but it's not retrieval as maybe a lot of us know it to be.
Yeah, it probably hones in on that idea that you mentioned a minute ago of like maybe teaching retrieval as an explicit thing by itself and then teaching inference explicitly by itself is probably not the best way to do it, because like Dylan was alluding to, it is really just a whole skill set, and everything bleeds into each other all the time. Like ultimately with reading, right? It's can you read these words? Like it does all boil down to, can you read these words and do you know what they mean? Even at the most simplest level, like could be a really simple retrieval question. But if a child literally doesn't know what one of the words mean in the question, then it's still a hard question. I think we fall into the trap of thinking that retrieval questions are the easy ones. That's definitely a thing that we as teachers do. Retrieval ones are the easy ones, guys, or inference ones. They're the tricky ones. And vocab ones, well, you just got to read more books, because if you don't know the words, you can't do them. And I feel like that's it. That's the narrative.
I'm sure you've both taught like skimming and scanning, right? Maybe as like part of retrieval, but you can't skim and scan for this question, because if I was going to teach how to find the answer, I might say, right, look for the word money, but the word money isn't even in the sentence where the answer is. So you've got to, what are you actually looking for? So it's like you can't even teach the skill of retrieval for this one. That's why kind of teaching a specific content domain doesn't really work.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I'm looking at the text now, and it literally just says, she started selling maize. So I guess the word selling was like the only clue that kids have to go, well, selling means you make money from it. But like you said, there is still inherent like inference from that. Like you have to know, what they mean. You can't just skim and scan. You're absolutely right.
I think this is a really good time now, moving on from this whole idea of, I think throughout the text, it was a theme, and with the questions that you had to be able to kind of switch between those synonyms in order to even do the most basic of retrieval. You mentioned in your blog a few examples like left school, dropped out of school, did well with success. This idea of just, there was a base level of understanding vocab that the children were expected to have, even just to access those basic retrieval questions. But what I think was really, really a big stickling point here, and I think a lot of people are listening to this for us to chat about this right now, was this big chasm, I thought, between the inference that we expect the children to be able to have to answer the questions themselves. So we're talking about what we just said there and being able to understand the text as a whole. And then the level of inference given the people who are literally paid to mark these tests for the children. Because let me just read this question out. This is the one that's caused a lot of controversy. Question 5 of the reading paper. According to the text, what is it important to have when learning something new? Seems like a straightforward question. You know, you can go to the text and find it out. Sophie, what was the big issue with this question and the mark scheme and the extra guidance in particular?
Well, I feel like I actually wrote back this one because Hayden brought it to my attention. So I will share the response. Then I want Hayden to go off on it.
No, I will.
Your rage inspired me, really. So an accepted answer was someone to help you learn. But an unacceptable answer was just someone to help you. So you're missing the word learn off the end. That wasn't allowed. Hayden, thoughts?
The reason this question, I know it angered all of us because we spoke about it, is that the question itself gives the context. It says, what is it important to have when learning something new? If I asked you that question, what is important to have when learning something new? I wouldn't expect you then 3 seconds later to give me an answer and then finish it with when learning something new, in case you'd forgotten the question you just asked me. It doesn't make any sense. So someone to help you, it's obviously talking about someone to help you when learning something new, because the question says that. So I think it is completely reasonable. And as an adult, I probably put, well, someone to help you. Because I would expect a very, very, very basic level of inference from the person who's listening to understand I'm obviously referencing, the question they just asked me.
I mean, the irony is it almost assumes a higher level of inference on the answerer's part, because you're saying, oh, yeah, someone to help you, because you're assuming they can infer that you mean someone to learn, so it's in the question. Yet that's apparently wrong, and it's an inference question. It's just bizarre.
One of the, because I did a TikTok video about this again, because Hayden said it to me. So I think he said it to all of us and said, look how ridiculous this is. So I did a TikTok video talking about it. And 98% of the comments were kind of aligned with what we're saying, which is nice when you see that, because it feels like it is an actual issue. But a few of the pushbacks that I were given, I kind of want to give to you two now to see how you would kind of react to that. And what your thoughts are, because someone said to me, for example, that this is what we need from the mark scheme, though, in order for us to be able to kind of differentiate between the highest of learners. So if we don't have this kind of really intricate way of marking, how on earth can we separate someone who's really, really good at comprehension with someone who's just okay, and therefore this is acceptable,
and maybe just guessing it a bit?
How would you push back to that?
Oh, well, for me, sorry, Soph, I know
No, go.
But for me, it's just obvious. Like the higher inference skills you have, I think the more likely you are to miss some information, because you assume high inference skills on the other people. I don't know. Does that make any sense?
No, it does, because I kind of equate it to when I'm teaching maths, for example. So I'm personally really confident at maths. So when I teach maths, I think I miss a lot of the like fundamental stuff because it comes so fluently to me. But and so kind of see that with reading. If you're so fluent with reading, you're not going to think, oh, I better add in all this extra information in case the person reading my answer isn't good at reading, because you're assuming that they are.
Yeah, that's it.
And then like, and just kind of anecdotally, like my friend Mark's English GCSE papers, and she was going through this, and she was going that they would no way be as picky as this. Like, this is insane that they're actually breaking it down to this level. I think what annoys me the most is how much it can cost children. Like, one lost mark is 2% of the paper. And we all know that could mean the difference between pass and fail. And that could mean the difference. If you've got a small cohort, that could be a difference in like 7% for your results, if not more. So it's just the accountability of this has to come hand in hand with it.
It needs to be right. It needs to be right. And they're spending millions on this as well. Let's not forget that there are millions and millions and millions of pounds spent on this entire process, including making the mark scheme.
Well, there were a bunch of people, again, this is the other kind of pushback that we had, and I'd love to know your thoughts, having, I think you two, in my opinion, are the experts here in terms of the breaking down of the SATs. I'm just a lowly low-key stage 2 teacher. But what I found really interesting was, again, there's still this mindset from people. And again, a lot of the comments were saying something like, yeah, well, when I was in school, I was taught to use the question in my answer so that there was no equivocation of what I mean. So, for example, what did you have for breakfast today? You should be answering, for breakfast, I had blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I feel like I kind of remember being sat in school, in primary school, and being told that. So is there any leg to stand on there? Or is it, again, just we're kind of marking the wrong thing? Are we marking comprehension skills, or are we marking your ability to regurgitate what you're told is needed to go for a mark scheme? What's your opinion on that?
I think that's different, because I'm just like looking at another one of the questions. Why did Fiona play carelessly when she started playing chess? They didn't have to put Fiona started playing carelessly when she started playing chess because that's what we were taught to do, include the question, your answer. It wastes so much time because of the timed aspect of these tests. The whole point is they don't need to answer in full sentences. They just answer in phrases. So nowhere else in the mark scheme do they have an actual none of the accepted answers have a capital letter and full stop at the end. They're all phrases and chosen words. So I just think that one is wild. I can't accept any defense to that question 5. I'm sorry.
Even in question 5, right, one of the accepted answers is just a coach. You're allowed to put a coach. You don't have to put, no one's going, a coach to do what? A coach to help you learn what, though? You've not clarified what the coach is there for. Well, yeah, because we all know it's for...
a bus, right? Or
yeah. You need a coach to get you there.
It's so true.
I just find it mad.
But when does it stop? Because someone said, it's a retrieval question, so you just take from the text. I was like, I've just decided to stop a word earlier than you decided to stop arbitrarily because there's inference in the question. For an 11-year-old, look, I can understand what the text, I can understand what the mark scheme is saying. I think that's a pushback as well. Don't you understand, though? There's clearly a difference between someone to help you in general and someone to help you specifically to get better at something. I'm like, I understand all of that, but that's not what the question says.
No,
it's not into the question.
It'd be like saying, what is just a slight change on it, because it feels more ridiculous when you do it about something else. What is it important to have when learning to play the piano? And someone says, a piano? A piano to do what? Obviously to play the piano. Okay, someone to help you. Well, someone to help you do what? Well, obviously learn the piano. You've just asked me what I need for the piano.
Tie my shoelaces. What do you think I mean? What do you think I'm thinking of right now?
I think they just made a mistake.
It seems ridiculous, doesn't it? This was 1 mark out of 50. But when there's going to be a headline at some point, like 28% of children leave primary school not being able to read because of something like this, which is just ludicrous. And that's why it frustrates all of us so much, because if you're outside of this and you don't see it inside, you're just going, wow, they can't teach them to read at primary school. And yet this is what is actually happening. Which is wild.
Nothing to do with it. But there you go. Question 5, bane of my life, but we'll move on.
Yeah, I think kind of moving on to the second text briefly, because I liked in your blog, you mentioned what I like about it is balanced in terms of, do you know what, as teachers, we are expecting certain things to come up. And I think in reading, one of the kind of sighs of relief that a lot of teachers had was when they saw that classic 3 marker appear in that second text, where it was an impression and some evidence. So that came up. Do you think it's inherently a good thing that we can almost predict exactly the type of question that will come up in a comprehension? Or do you, and therefore we're kind of teaching children to answer it based on the mark scheme, like we've just been talking about, is not necessarily a good thing. Do you think in this situation that's okay, or do you think still maybe they should mix it up a bit in the future?
I don't know. I think I do think it's okay because this is actually something we can cling on to, because you can't predict anything else they're going to do. And it's what's quite clear from the mark scheme is that you kind of need to be a mind reader half the time. So when something does come up that you can cling on to, like, yes, we taught this, we taught them how to do it. Like, and actually, I think it gives the children so much more confidence going, I've seen a grid like this before, or I've seen words like this before, I know exactly what I'm doing. And it doesn't change the fact that it is still quite a tricky inference question. Like, you have to work out what kind of character they are and there's loads of different accepted answers for this.
Yeah.
It's still tricky, but just because they've given them the kind of scaffold there to be able to help them answer, that's why I loved that question. It was helpful to the kids, and all the answers were perfectly acceptable and reasonable. So
I personally thought this was a great question. Like, just to give the mark scheme some credit now, I suppose, and just the test in general. I'll tell you what, I'm going to preface this with just a reminder that I think these tests were really good. I think the actual question booklet and the reading text are really good. It's some of the mark scheme we've got a problem with. But this question was fantastic, because what I found in previous years is I get a bit frustrated with the 3 mark, like, what impression do you get of this character kind of questions, when there's not actually that many impressions to have.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like, there's only like 2 acceptable answers and they have to pick one of them. And I'm always like, they feel like they need more. I just want to see, can the kids justify something? That's what I want. So give them as much chance as possible. And this year they did it so well. They definitely had the most answers I've ever seen. So for example, for Tom, there were 4 different descriptors of Tom's, what impression you got of him. And there were 6 for the other character, for Jeff. There were loads. It was almost like properly letting them just, if you can do this skill, there's loads of ways for you to do it. So that's not a barrier. Just, write down what you think.
Yeah. And because quite often they do this with one character. So give me 2 impressions of one character. So you've got to find 2 adjectives that are actually different. And then 2 ways of supporting those adjectives. But there's 2 characters here. If we actually read the question, it's basically what impressions do you get of the 2 characters?
Yeah, that's it.
But yeah, it was lovely. I mean, in contrast, I'm sure we'll comment it, the 3 mark question, the third text, I thought was actually really tricky. But this one, go on.
Let's talk about that. Like, what do you think the main differences were then? Because again, in traditionally, I think you mentioned in the kind of guidance that was given about the test, you can have up to 4 3-mark questions, but traditionally it's always basically 2. We can kind of nail our hat on. So what did you find in terms of saying, okay, that first 3-mark question was good, it was fair, there was a scaffold, there were lots of options, fill your boots, kids. What made this trickier, and do you think that's necessarily a bad thing towards the end of the test?
Yeah, no, I don't think so, because obviously, firstly, the third text is supposed to be the most difficult. It's aimed at our greater depth readers, isn't it? And there's got to be questions that you found tricky. Honestly, I thought it was tricky because when I sat and did it myself, I struggled a bit. Like, it didn't come easily to me to find both. And when I went through the mark scheme, I wouldn't have got full marks from what I wrote on it. And it gave me answers that I thought, I hadn't considered that. But I didn't think they're really rubbish answers. I think they are acceptable answers. I just didn't think of them. So I was like, wow, it kind of does really stretch all your readers. But I think because it's about one character, again, you had to find 2 impressions. And obviously the language is a bit more complex in that text. So it was more challenging.
So this was about an archer being experienced, right? And was it specifically you had to find evidence as to what made it obvious she was experienced?
Yeah, and I think, because I didn't put this one in my blog, they'd given an example already, so that kind of took one away.
Yeah, that's right. I'll read it to you. The example was, she had the strength to do it. So that's how you can say she's experienced. And the evidence was she was able to pull the bow back to its fullest extension.
Yeah.
That was it.
So you've taken an option away from the child, basically.
Yeah, you have.
So instead of building a scaffold where it's a table and you can kind of have your free choice, the scaffold here is almost more abstract. Here's an answer you could have given, and then that's harder for you to find.
You can't do it now. What kids classically do as well is they don't read that example. It's often quite small and grey, and I even skimmed over it at first, and then they'll put that answer as their own and lose out, even though they actually thought.
I think as well, because that was one of the most obvious answers, that she was strong. The one that came instantly to me after that was, she was quite accurate, because she obviously hit in the middle. And then I don't think I came up with what would have been accepted by the mark scheme, a second one. What were they, Hayden, out of interest?
Composure, her focus,
see,
and her confidence. That's quite abstract, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
There were quite a few more. There was like her knowledge of strategies and techniques.
Abstract again.
Like her knowledge of her bow. So just like obviously knowing how the fullest extension and all that sort of stuff. And her knowledge of past learning, which I thought was funny because it did mention that one bit in the text. Do you remember it said like she heard the ancient commands in her head, in her body, and somewhere deep inside her that must have been her soul.
I'd love to know how many children got that.
There's no way anyone put that. That's that to me. And do you know what? That kind of highlights one thing I wanted to pick your brains on, both of you, on this. Is when I was the same, Sophie, I had a look at this test, like, during SATS week, and I was sort of flicking through it. And And I also found that with a few of those questions in that last text, I genuinely was not 100% sure on my answer. And the reason I think for that is we've become so obsessed with, you have to be able to give clear evidence for your answers, right? It's got to be super clear. You've inferred this because this is undeniably why. And I found, maybe for the first time, maybe it's happened before, that a lot of the questions in that third text, the inference was like a little bit wishy-washy.
Yeah.
I thought it was a little bit like, you couldn't really prove it. There was like the evidence was a little bit. It wasn't as strong, maybe in the text. I was like, okay, well that could imply this, so I won't put that as my answer because they're going to want something more secure. And I looked at the mark scheme and I was like, oh, they absolutely did accept that. That's weird.
Yeah. I think I was just looking at another one that I know caused a bit of fuss, and I can kind of see why some people would agree that it's not acceptable. But it was the one about question 35, why were the rules changed after the first round? Reason. And it was basically all about, had to be something about the increased enjoyment of the crowd or the increased challenge, or something about it being more. But I think what people found so frustrating was that you could write to make it more interesting to watch, but you couldn't write to make it interesting to watch.
Yeah.
So there's such a minute difference. And yes, there is a difference, but I feel like if someone put that second answer, is that not them understanding?
Yeah, I agree, because it's like saying, oh, I can imagine what they'll do. They'll be like, oh, but it's implying, if they don't put more, it's implying that they didn't already think it was interesting to watch already. Does it, honestly, does it really matter that much to understanding this question? It's interesting now. They moved it back. It's interesting. And like, we're going for quick answers. Why did they put them back? Oh, to show their skills. No, it has to be to better show their skills. Okay, come on. Do we really think kids putting to show their skills didn't pick up in the text that they already had skills through the whole thing? Like, come on.
Yeah. And if you're putting to make it interesting to watch, so you're assuming that it was boring before, that's still then more interesting, isn't it? Because it was boring to interesting, as opposed to interesting to more interesting. The amount of interest is still increased. So I think it's another case of like, if you're that fluent at inferring, you might not bother to put like little, what is more, an adverb, like little words in, because you just assume a level of inference on the marker as well, like you're saying. So,
and there was a third answer for that one, which just kind of wraps it up. They did accept to make it more challenging for the archers, or for example, it makes it harder for the competitors, but they didn't accept to make it hard.
So it's this idea of increased, isn't it?
All of them were about increasing, to better show their skills, to make it harder. It needed those extra 2 letters on that to get the mark, and to make it more interesting to watch. I don't know, I just thought it was a bit picky.
Well, on that note, can we go to question 36 then? Because it's in a similar theme, is what made Mary worry that her bow, Mary being the name of the archer, if anyone's listening, what made Mary worry that her bow might be close to breaking? So you could say she pulled it back as far as it could go, but you couldn't say she pulled it back hard.
Yeah. I mean, this to me is a different. So I completely agree with what both of you are saying here, but I want to make the distinction that I do think this is different to what we talked about earlier in terms of learning being in a question. I think that is just wrong, because I think it's literally baked into the question that we're obviously talking about learning, and I think that assumption is completely fair for all children to say. It's in the question. It's obviously what we're talking about. I do think here there is wiggle room for someone to kind of have a different opinion to what we're saying. I think there's wiggle room for people to say, look, the literal point of why it was changed was literally to make it more of something. Now, I don't want to say I don't disagree with what you're saying at all, but I think this falls into a category of a debate about how harsh we are marking these children on what they understand to it being literally wrong. So I just wanted to lay that down first, basically. And I think this falls into it. If a child said she was worried about the bow being close to breaking because she pulled it back hard, I am completely happy with the inference level of an 11-year-old.
Yeah, same. The line's wrong. That's what it is. You're absolutely right, Dylan. Because I get that, you can argue the discrepancies, but the line is just wrong. That is fine. They have passed that question by putting that. It's mad.
Especially considering the conditions they're under. It's timed, it's pressure. Like, your good readers are going to make some slight mistakes. That doesn't mean they're not good readers just because they've missed out 1 word or 2 words. I mean, I know that's a bigger issue with SATs in itself, but that's why the reading mark scheme in particular, I think, has caused a lot of uproar, because it's just so harsh on these kids, and it really makes a distinction between you can't read and you can read, and that's just not what it's like.
Yeah, there's a wider issue, isn't there, with how SATs results are interpreted. And I think looking at the mark scheme, kind of, if someone had a really good understanding of this mark scheme, I think hopefully it would give more nuance in how we treat the results coming out of it. Because if we are really picking up at this level and then saying 28% of kids can't read, I'm like, okay, these clearly don't go together. So let's just have an understanding of what this actually is and maybe a debate, but don't have a headline on BBC saying this many people can't read anymore. That's just nonsense.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, nice. Should we move on to the GPS paper? Should we talk a bit about that? So maybe we can dive into some sort of the key findings from your blog. I don't think there's GPS was quite as juicy as the reading, but I'm sure there's a few bits we can talk about. So
Sorry, Kane, go.
No, I was going to say over to you, Sophie. Go on, start us off with some interesting bits.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like the GPS again. I mean, there's one question we'll come on to later that I thought was, well, there's a couple that I thought were a bit like, you know, a few things to say about it, but nothing hugely controversial like the reading paper. So if you break them down by the content domains again, so there are 7 content domains. So things like punctuation is G5 and vocabulary is G6. And so it's broken down into 7. And the biggest represented ones are always G5 and G1. So G1's like word classes and G5's punctuation. And then this year it was very similar. Right. So the 2 content domains together made up 56%, so over half of the paper. Which again, it makes sense because there's lots of sub-strands within those where the others are a little bit smaller. So one, I can't remember which one it is, but one of them is about function of sentences, which isn't huge. So it does make sense that they make up most of the paper. But yeah, there's been nothing wildly different this year in terms of the types of questions that are in the paper. And again, the most popular ones seem to be across all papers. The most popular sub-strands that appear are punctuation for parenthesis, synonyms and antonyms and apostrophes and verbs. They come up a lot, which you might have thought when you're reading the paper in a lot of different questions. But there wasn't anything that hugely inspired me to moan about this paper.
No, it's kind of like the meta level of moaning about GPS kind of just remains, doesn't it? Like there's lots of reasons why we think the GPS paper in general over all the years is just a ridiculous thing to be doing. But yeah, this didn't stand out particularly differently amongst the rest. The only one I thought that was just a bit interesting because it hasn't been up in a while was the question on the subjunctive form, the subjunctive verb. That's to circle the verb that was in the subjunctive, I think was the question. That was interesting because it's not come up.
No, I think it's about a couple of years hasn't come up. And to be honest, sometimes I just don't even teach it because I'm like, either it's not going to come up or it's literally one mark. And so there's no point wasting my breath on it because it's just, the way I'm going to teach it to get you to get that 1 mark is a really rudimentary, actually bad way of teaching it. So I just may as well just miss it out altogether. There is one question that I commented on quite a bit that so did a few other people. It was question 22 about the fronted adverbials and a discussion about a subordinate clause being an adverbial, which in the DfE glossary of grammatical terms, it is. But I think because we kind of assume adverbial phrase, right? You usually say adverbial phrase, and a phrase doesn't have a verb in it, but a subordinate clause does have a verb in it. So when you see a subordinate clause, you don't instantly think, oh, phrase, oh, adverbial phrase. So to now kind of change, and again, it's just so complex for children. Yes, that's a subordinate clause. It's also a fronted adverbial, which could also be this, which could also be that. And it's just,
I hate that.
I only achieved that, and I know other children, other people's kids did from matter of a process of elimination. It can't be that, can't be that, can't be that. It must be that, but I just don't know that it is. But I'm going to tick it anyway.
Yeah, I agree because the only way you could really do that is knowing the other 3 didn't have fronted clauses really at all. They didn't have subordinate clauses.
Slight pushback a little bit here in terms of. I'm hearing you talk about this. It's really interesting, and I think at the forefront of what both of you are saying here is kind of in test technique almost of identifying something quickly, and because we're going to be able to tick it. I do think if this was put in front of my year 4 class, I think nearly all of them would get it right, because to them a fronted adverbial tells you how or when something happens. Right. So do you think it's a problem with how we're teaching mainly because we're thinking, oh gosh, this is a way of teaching it because it's simple for a child to identify, therefore it's going to come up, almost like you're saying with subjunctive? Are we falling a little bit into that trap with things like this in terms of a fronted adverbial and not teaching it broadly enough for children to have a good understanding of what it is, rather teaching it quite narrowly in order to identify things between differences? In GPS, that is so subjective, where one word can have 3 different word classes in different ways and aspects. What do you think about where that line is, maybe where we're teaching the kids?
I think for me it's become, because being in year 6, I've been so set on, in general writing, teaching loads of different sentence structures, right? So you've got complex sentence, subordinate clause, main clause, we do reverse complex sentence, so main clause, subordinate clause, the other way around. Or what about an embedded one? So I'm teaching all these sentence types and I'm using subordinate clause, main clause, subordinate clause. Then I'm saying, right, well, we can do tramp sentences. I don't know if you use that terminology. So tramp being adverbial, so time, reason, manner, and place. So for telling you when, it might be at 3 o'clock or after lunch. So because we're drilling that, for me in year 6, drilling that terminology all the time, an adverbial telling you when would be a phrase with no verb. So after lunch, comma, da-da-da-da.
Sure.
Whereas a complex sentence that starts with a subordinate clause, after we had lunch, it's like I would teach that because that's a complex sentence. But the one where it doesn't have a verb in the adverbial isn't a complex sentence. So I think that's maybe a downfall of like teaching all of that
Properly.
stuff together. It just the lines. Yeah, so I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying the way we're teaching it is definitely blurring things.
Yeah, and I think, but I guess the point I'm making here is inherently it is going to be blurry. So when it comes to writing a test to test children, all these different types of things, we're always going to have these discussions because baked into it is the fact that, okay, I guess, like you're saying, that is a subordinate clause, but it is also a fronted adverbial, etc. I think that's more of an issue with trying to test very strictly GPS in general when it comes to ticking a box. We're always going to have these kind of like, well, okay, I guess that kind of does fall into that box. And I just think we kind of, I don't know, we're not setting the kids up to fail at all in terms of us teaching, because I think we teach it the way we have to for writing as well as for identifying it in a test. I would weight it more that it's more beneficial the way you two are describing you do it in your class with their writing, etc. That's more beneficial for the child. I just think that will set up the children when it comes to a question like this to find it tricky and a bit like, oh, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it kind of almost, I think I'm on Sophie's side in terms of it. It does kind of just punish you for teaching genuinely, like quite properly. Yeah. If like Sophie is teaching it genuinely by the book. Yeah. Like this is what a fronted adverbial is. This is what a subordinate clause is, and there are subtle differences. And this genuinely blurs it to the point where I think people are saying it's just wrong. It's just not even a fronted adverbial.
But I don't think I think it is. I think the point here is that something can be both. That's the point I'm saying. And if we're teaching that it can't be both, because it's easier when it comes to putting together some writing, that has its use for writing. And I'm saying that's probably a better use. Yeah. But it is wrong to say that it can't be both, because in this situation, correct me if I'm wrong, Sophie, is this here, when the waitress comes over, that is both a subordinate clause and a fronted adverbial. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, yes, apparently, technically correct. And according to the glossary of terms, that is both, because an adverbial can be a subordinate clause as well.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's not wrong.
So,
that's what I mean. It's almost like earlier. It's not wrong, but it's annoying.
I got the impression that people were arguing that it was just straight up wrong. Right. That's what.
Well, there are some people that are, but then I guess that's the issue with the DFE are going by their glossary of terms. Whether that's right or not is a whole different thing. But they've obviously on their own set definition. I think the thing is, I've never taught this as wrong, but I haven't taught it that it can also be the same. So I've not said a subordinate clause isn't an adverbial. I've just never personally said, and that's my own downfall, that a subordinate clause is a type of adverbial. I've just never said that. So it's just, for me, I was just confused by that. I mean, I got it myself because of, like I said before, but
luckily the elimination process was actually quite simple, straightforward to make it easier.
Because the rest of the list, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the rest are just very obviously not that thing. I think Michael Rosen would be, his ears would be bleeding.
Let's say he absolutely hates this topic.
Yeah. I want to say that now because I feel like I'm being the bad guy here. I'm being like, well, actually, if you look at the definitions, if you just kind of put this conversation into a pot and said, what on earth are you talking about? I think would be the fair thing, wouldn't it?
Realistically.
Why do we care?
Realistically, none of this, everything is nonsense. We're just talking within the constraints of nonsense about this.
Can I ask you both one question in general about GPS, maybe before we move on? And Sophie, you might have something you want to talk about. But the generic feeling I thought of GPS, and something that jumped out at me from your blogs again, Sophie, was this idea of tricks being embedded into questions. And my view is that it's not an inherently bad thing to do, and I think a lot of people don't like it. So I'm wondering what your opinion is. For example, you talked about this idea of testing children's true understanding of a concept rather than just using those kind of quick shortcuts we've talked about here. I think what you just said is kind of an example of that in the most extreme way. But you also had some examples in your blog, question 12, which sentence starts with an adverbial. So talking about just an adverbial in general, and then went on to question 34. But just like looking into question 12 for a second, what do you think is it doing here that's kind of going over the surface level? Oh, let's just quickly do a trick in terms of the use of a comma as well with the adverbial.
Yeah, I mean, I think because we all kind of drill into them after a fronted adverbial, you use a comma because obviously that's what we're told to do. But here there's two sentences with commas. and one of them is a compound sentence. And again, we teach them, in a compound sentence before a conjunction, you put a comma. So if children don't actually understand what an adverbial is, like I clearly didn't in the question before, they're going to see those two with a comma and then just think, I'm just going to tick a random one because I don't really know, because I think they'd assume that they're just going to have one sentence with a comma because a comma always comes after adverbials. So they might just think both of those are adverbials then. So actually, until you truly know, and I like that question. My point was that really tests children actual understanding. A bit like the other one I mentioned about the relative clause. So relative clauses are usually, I guess, in the middle of a sentence, right, with parenthesis around them, more commonly like that. And this one has, so it says, after her dance class, Jamila has a strawberry milkshake, which she buys from the local cafe. So the main clause in the middle has commas around it. So if you're relative clause must be that, but it's in the middle, it's got parentheses around it. When actually it's the bit at the end. And I did quite like that because I thought unless you actually know a relative clause starts with a relative pronoun, it adds information to the noun, you're not going to fully understand that. So I don't see those as tricking the children. I just see them as like, don't fall for like the easy way out, because that's not the true understanding.
I kind of see them as the opposite. I think I'm more on line with sort of Dylan's head here, what you were saying a minute ago. I think they're the great questions because they're actually saying the kids that have just learned tricks, like surface level understanding of these things, will actually get them wrong because they haven't truly understood it. And I think that's good. I think we should probably not be encouraging teachers to be like, every single relative clause in every test is being between two commas. So, that just teach them it's between two commas. No, we should actually teach them what relative clauses are, and then they can find them even in trickier ones.
So based on what you just said, in terms of these questions are actually good because we're not doing surface level stuff. Yeah. Why does that not apply to that question we just spoke about earlier with the adverbial and it being a subordinate clause as well? Is the argument here that the line's just too far for 11-year-olds? Come on. Or are we just saying, fair game, actually, that's just testing a wrong bit of knowledge that is just incorrect?
I think things like relative clauses, the kind of parameters of that are a relative clause, it has to start with a relative pronoun and it has to add information to the noun. There's only like two rules really that define that, whereas looking at the adverbials one, I just think it's a lot more vague, or there's a lot more wiggle room. So an adverbial can be this and that and that and that can also be that. It just feels like there's a lot more space for children to go wrong. So I get what you're saying. It's not wrong. Technically, it's not. But because of so much, all the content we've got to teach, and then all the like little rules that the children have to remember about each bit, when it doesn't help them with their writing, really, as we know, most of this, and they don't use it in secondary school, and most adults don't know it. I think it's just all that frustration we have about it influencing our thought on that question being that question.
That's it, isn't it? It's I think it's just an eye roll. And honestly, I look at that and I'm like, we've spent all these years, the government is saying, the children must know what fronted adverbials are. They must know what subordinate clauses are. We're going to test them one time on it, and we're going to give them one where it's either. We're going to give them a subordinate clause and see. It's like, come on, like really. So I could have really just said to the kids all along, just anything that goes before a main clause doesn't make sense. It's a subordinate clause or a fronted adverbial. Don't worry about learning the difference. It doesn't matter in the test. It's just a bit annoying, isn't it? It's just like, why would we be bothered with all this distinctive?
Kids only get confused by that if they've had really good implicit teaching on what both things are.
Yeah, exactly. Really. Yeah, if we'd just been lazy, they would have been fine. Right. There we go. Anyway, that's the GPS.
Well, I think we should move on to maths. So in terms of the tests, again, I feel like this is much more at home for me because I know you guys have got a lot of experience with tests, but as maths lead, I do feel like I've got a good understanding of previous SATs papers. In general, these maths papers, I've got to say, having gone through all of them, I really quite liked them. What about you, Sophie?
I liked them too. I did really like them. There wasn't really anything that enraged me. And I do like to be enraged because it's quite cathartic. But first, if we look at the breakdown of year group content, so you can't do this in the reading or the GPS, but you can do this really easy in the maths, is which questions came from which year group curriculum. So across all three papers, historically, year 6 has had the heaviest representation, although saying that years 3, 4 and 5 collectively make up the majority of questions, so always over half from years 3, 4 and 5, which is, I'm sure lots of people heard that before, but especially if you're new to year 6, it's really important to note because it just shows how important the foundations are in maths. And because the pass mark has generally been lower than the combination of questions from the years 3, 4 and 5, there's that whole, theoretically, you don't even have to teach any of the year 6 curriculum, and you can still pass the SATs. And it just shows it's a Key Stage 2 paper. It's not a year 6 paper, it's a Key Stage 2 paper. And I know some teachers have asked me before, which I haven't done yet because for various reasons, whether I could make one of the SATs paper and take the year 6 questions out. And so like give it to year 5 with just the year 3, 4, 5 questions to see how they would do. I think there's pros and cons to that. But this year, the year 6 content dropped a bit. So it was 44% last year of the papers were year 6 content. This year, 38%. Which means that the years 3, 4 to 5 content was 62%, which is massive when you think about it.
Do you reckon that means the pass mark will go up? Sure.
I don't know, because it's not, obviously it's not just about the year group it comes from, it's about the complexity of the questions, a bit like the grammar stuff. So, you might get a noun question. Obviously nouns are covered in Key Stage 1, but the complexity of that question a year 1 child couldn't answer. So it's similar to this, like it was like a year 4 question, come from the year 4 curriculum, but the way it was presented, maybe some year 4s would really struggle with it because they're just not experienced enough at maths. But I don't know. So the pass mark has, what was it last year? 49% last year, which was the lowest it's been. So I don't know what they'll do this year. I feel like it should be higher, because in my opinion, this was one of the easiest papers that we've had. What do you think, Aidan?
Well, I mean, firstly, I think after the first reasoning paper, I saw a lot of teachers being like, "Oh my god, that was horrendous!" And we can have a really good conversation in a bit, I think, about reasoning and problem solving. I know Dylan's got some really good thoughts on that. But I thought overall, I really, really like these papers. I thought they were absolutely by far the best SATs papers that have ever been written in terms of the quality of questions and the variation of questioning, like styles and even like the visuals. I found a lot of the visual questions in the reasoning paper were like genuinely like superbly written questions. I was in awe.
I agree.
So, very happy.
I just want to talk about the content domains quickly as well. So there are 9, I think, just count them up, 9 content domains in maths. So ranging from the first one is number and place value, and then you've got statistics. At the end, it's just the 9th one. So again, historically, the biggest proportion of questions has always come from calculations, so 4 operations. And then the second most represented is FTP, so fractions, decimals, and percentages. Same again this year. Calculations took a bit of a drop. So last year it was 41% of all 3 papers, and this year it was 35%. So that's still high, just not as high as it was before. FTP is similar, 24%. So that's a quarter of all 3 papers on fractions, decimals, percentages. The others are very similar representation, really low in things like statistics, 2%. Position and direction 3%. There's a bit of a hike in measurement this year, so it's 11% of questions, which is amongst one of the highest it's been. But generally, the kind of representation has been similar across the years, and again, that has to do with the sub-strands in each one. So there are loads of objectives and calculations, so obviously it's going to have a heavier weighting in the papers. But yeah, so I think the combined calculations and FTP combined was 59%. So that is huge, just on those 2 content domains. So I think whenever I'm thinking about how I'm planning my year for year 6, if I think I'm not going to get the curriculum before May, which often is the case, I just won't teach statistics, because it's 2% of the paper and we can cover that afterwards. And I think if you're a good mathematician, you might be able to answer a bar graph question or a line graph question without me teaching it. So if I'm really going to prioritise, I'll just bung that in afterwards. But yeah, in terms of the data, that's how this paper stood.
Do you think it's important? Because I mean, a lot of people would probably say, yeah, I just don't teach this bit because it doesn't come up much in the SATs, and then they don't teach it full stop. Do you think it's important to do the bit you kind of very quickly said then, which is bung it in afterwards? Like, what's the value?
I mean, this is probably a different conversation, but I've seen recently someone go, what are you teaching in maths now SATs is done? And before I even read the comments, I was like, well, there's loads of stuff I wouldn't usually have taught before SATs, so I would just be teaching them what they haven't learnt yet. And unless your children, all of them will have scored 100% on SATs papers, then let's go over the stuff that they still didn't know very well, because there's still loads of curriculum to cover. And then all the comments were like, oh, we're doing this project, we're doing that project, we're making a roller coaster park. And I was like, okay. Personally,
why is making a roller coaster park what everyone does? Everyone does that.
Yeah. Such a thing,
because it's a free project on a very big educational platform that people like to use.
That is probably the answer.
But that's just my personal gripe. There's no right or wrong to that. I just think there's definitely content that your children still don't understand, because you'll have raced through it before SAT or not covered it at all. So you still need to cover that till the end of the curriculum. But that's a different topic. Sorry.
Maths ends in May in year 6, actually.
That's when maths I think it's a good point. I just want to clarify, because I hate opening up the idea that people would be like, oh, Sophie thinks that there's some objectives we shouldn't teach just because they're not in the test. And actually you're saying, well, no, I'll just teach them afterwards because they're not that important.
Because I want to do it. It's a bit like the subject. Well, no, it's not a subjunctive, because I just think that's pointless anyway. I just would hate to kind of skim over it, not teach it properly, and then never do it properly. So
sure.
Because you'd like to think we're not doing everything for the test. So the test is a week interruption in our curriculum, and then we just return to what we were doing properly with a little bit of, structuring it towards the test beforehand. But it's not an ideal world, I get it. So,
Were there any areas of the maths papers where I could have got away with not teaching anything at all? Like they didn't come up in the tests at all?
Yeah.
They weren't represented?
No, annoyingly, so I think I said before the papers came out, there are 3 it's like sub-strands that hadn't appeared since before COVID. So they must appear this year. So that was volume, scale factors, and then reading scales. Volume appeared, so we had a volume question, but there's still 2 that haven't come up. So now that's like 4 years or something. So scale factors and reading scales still haven't appeared. So, a bit like I've been saying about the poem, maybe next year, but maybe they just won't ever appear now, just to spite me.
Yeah.
Pure scalism. That's what I call it. No scales whatsoever. That's just horrible. So in terms of the papers, obviously maths is split into paper 1, paper 2, paper 3. I don't think personally we need to spend very long talking about the arithmetic. No. I think the arithmetic was very fair. I think it's very predictable. And I think what I just want to do now is preface what we're about to talk about with reasoning with my thoughts on arithmetic very quickly, because I think it's super important to have a chunk of the test which is simply seeing if children can do the maths.
Yeah.
And I think that is vital. And I think that's where the arithmetic comes in really nicely, because you can pretty much predict what's going to come up in that arithmetic paper. I think that's a good thing, because if we're not testing reasoning or problem solving, we're just seeing if children can add some numbers together, multiply fractions together, do long division, etc. So I think that was fair, in my opinion. And now if we talk about reasoning and problem solving, one thing I want to put to you both straight away is I think we all really valued the quality of the questions. What would be your pushback to people who, particularly after paper 2, which was the first reasoning paper, said, my goodness me, the kids have never seen anything like this before. That's so irrelevant to the life of a child. Why are we testing kids on this? It didn't look anything like previous SATs papers when I've done time and time again for problem solving. Is that inherently a bad thing, that it's not the same looking as previous papers? Or do you think that's actually something we should be doing?
Well, I just want to come back to the arithmetic quickly, because no, I agree with you. I don't think so. And in contrast, that the arithmetic, I don't accept any, this is really hard this year, because genuinely from analysing them, they are exactly the same every single year. Apart from there's one question this year, just quickly, there's always 36 questions. 32 of them are always 1 mark. You've got 2 long multiplication, which is a 3-digit by 2-digit and a 4-digit by 2-digit. 2 long division, a 3 by 2, a 4 by a 2. And then pretty much everything else is the same and the numbers are different. So, this question appeared earlier. This has this. It's like, no, they're the same. It's basically an algorithm. I'm sure they just put it into AI and just regurgitate it. So the arithmetic is predictable. You cannot say it's harder. The BIDMAS one, fine. There's an extra number, but if your kids know BIDMAS, it's fine. So I don't accept that either. So the fact that the reasoning is like presented in different contexts, I think is exactly the whole point of reasoning. And when I sat the paper and thought, this is great. I really like the questions. Went on social media and saw things like vile, awful, this was so hard. I just thought, but I think the actual content behind the question, if the kids knew it, they should be able to apply it to this different context. And if they can't, that just means they don't understand the content. So Hayden, I know you've got extra opinions on this too.
Yeah, just not much more to add. I mean, there's two lines of thought. One is agreeing and saying that I do think sometimes maybe it's a trap of year 6, I don't know, but we lose the whole point. We lose what we do. What are we even doing? What are we teaching these kids for? What is problem solving? What is it? Unless there's unfamiliar context, you can't actually truly problem solve, right? If you've trained a child to solve a problem, then you give them the exact same problem with different numbers, and not problem solving, they're just doing arithmetic now, because they already know how to solve the problem. So I think the test did that really well. And I think some teachers got a bit annoyed about the fact that there was real problem solving in it, and they couldn't prep their kids for it by showing them the exact questions. And I think that's probably not a good thing to moan about. But I do think there was another line of thought which came from teachers, which is just the accessibility in general. I think a lot of them were saying, my kids actually have learned this and they've done loads of problem solving, but it was just a little bit out of reach with too many questions. It was a bit too worded in a complex way, or they just maybe didn't understand this bit of vocabulary in it, and it just kind of threw them off. I think that's a legitimate discussion that people can have about whether how much comprehension comes into reasoning and problem solving. But
some has to.
Yeah, there is a point where it's
is that not kind of the point? And to me, is that you can draw parallels, right, with teaching inference. So some people might think, I'm going to teach inference, I'm going to just expose them to loads of inference questions and I hope that they, by osmosis, absorb how to infer something, which to me is like problem solving. Give them loads of different problem solving questions and then they'll just learn how to problem solve, rather than, I suppose I'm not allowed to name it, but there's a resource that someone makes that teaches children how to problem solve and different skills that can be applied to any question. And if you teach them a bit like, expose them to loads of text and how you can infer, expose them to loads of maths problem solving questions and how you can problem solve, that's going to carry them a lot further because they can apply that to loads of other questions. You can't just problem solve well by answering loads of different problem solving questions and hoping for the best.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
I gave them this and I changed the numbers in the question. I was like, cool. So then they already know they know to add and then subtract. Like you're not actually doing anything. I think a point I wanted to make is there is a bit of predictability I find in reasoning, and having gone through all of the papers over the years, there is for example, a structure of a question that I see come up all the time. Mm-hmm. And this structure of a question is where you essentially have 3 parts. It could be a measurement, could be a distance, could be just a number of things, an amount of money. You have a whole amount that it costs, and you need to figure out one of the parts. So, for example, in this one, there was a map, and there was a road on the map between 4 cities. And it said the distance to city 1 to city 2 is this. City 2 to city 3 is that. What is the distance to city 4 if the total distance is 800 and something? Now, this comes up, honestly, nearly every year where you're given those 2 parts and you find out what's left. And you can teach children how to figure out a missing number when you're given 2 parts out of 3 in total. And that's fine, and we can do that. What I think the test always does really well is what we're discussing here, is actually making it different and tricky for the children to identify that's what they've got to do. And that's where the problem solving comes in. And even in this test, you had that simpler version there where there was a nice visual of a map and it was almost like a number line, and you could kind of draw the bar underneath it if you wanted to. But then understanding that's what you had to do was probably okay, relatively simple. Do some adding and subtracting, like you said, which is genuinely year 4 maths, which maybe that came under a year 4 domain there, which is fine. But then later in the same kind of group of tests, we had that structure come up again. And this time it was about the cost of a trip for children. But the way that it was made harder this time was that instead of being given the total straight up and then you just work out what's missing, you were given the amount it costs for 12 children. So there was an extra step involved where you had to divide by 12 to get for per child. That was then your total. And then you had the classic structure of 3 parts. And the point I'm making here is I'm not against that. We're allowed a modicum of predictability because at the end of the day, the children are working out that they've got to add 2 numbers together. Like we can't change that ever. But I think the way this test was written was good in that it gave different ways of getting there for the children to actually figure out. And to me, that's what we're assessing. And it's why arithmetic's so important to keep and preserve. I've already assessed if they can do the maths. That's done in the arithmetic. We can't then complain, I don't think, that it's tricky to figure out what to do in the reasoning. That is what reasoning is.
Yeah, definitely. Sophie, did you have any particular... did you have a favourite question? I know that sounds that's very like the nerdiest teacher thing to ask.
I had 2 favourites, but they're under the same theme. So in paper 2, question 15, the hexagon one that was shaded.
So good.
What percentage is shaded? Oh, that was just so satisfying. And then in a similar theme, paper 3, question 20, the triangle one, shapes making equilateral triangles. Sorry. Great minds. Do you want to talk about that one then? Because I've just talked about the hexagon one.
Well, do the hexagon one first and I'll talk about the triangles.
Well, I don't know exactly why I loved it. I think I just loved the diagram was obviously so helpful. I think the fact 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Just check it. Yeah, there are 10. So it's really nice for kids. It's a percentage and it's a fraction over 10. Like, well, pretty much. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's 5.5 of them shaded. Was it? Or if I miscounted, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, 4.5. 4.5 of them shaded. So yeah, 4.5 out of 10. I mean, it's a fraction over a fraction. But again, if you're confident with percentages and fractions, that's not hard to turn into a percentage at all.
Yep.
And I just think the visual really helped, and they were exact hard. I don't know, it's just really aesthetically satisfying and mathematically satisfying.
I agree. Being in the room with children, I saw all of the different things happen that question is designed for, and I was like, that's a perfect question. I saw the rusher. I saw the one that looked at that and it thought, that looks like a half, done, 50%, moved on. They spent 1 second looking at that question.
Yeah.
I saw the kids who looked at that and thought, I'm going to take my time. How can I be systematic? I know what I can do. I can count how many are shaded out of how many parts. Classic. I learned that in year 3, when you're writing what a fraction is. Yeah. And they wrote down 4.5 out of 10, and I could see them being like, I'm pretty sure there's a rule against this. I don't think I can write like 4.5. I saw some kids write 4.5%. That's as far as they got. They were nearly there at the problem solving, but they didn't have the last step. Yeah. And then I saw the kids who just saw that and thought, 4.5 out of 10, 45 out of 100, 45% done. Yeah. And I was like, cool, that's the perfect problem solving because that just differentiated in all these different levels. Yeah. Like I could really see who truly gets it, who was halfway there, and who didn't really have any clue or just rushed. Yeah. And it was the same with the triangle one. The triangle question was just absolutely fantastic. I remember standing there watching. So for context, and anyone's not seen it, it was just 4 triangles, 4 equilateral triangles arranged into like one larger equilateral triangle. And one of the 4 triangles was then split again into another 4. And one of those little ones was shaded. So it just says what fraction of the whole shape was shaded. And I saw, again, like just standing there, I could see one child spent ages with a ruler drawing in all the little triangles to all the other ones so that they could count it up. And they got it right.
Yeah,
they counted. They split all of them. They couldn't make the quick link of, well, there's going to be 4 in each one. So it's just 16. And then I saw another child who literally wrote down 1/4 times 1/4.
Amazing.
It was a quarter of a quarter.
Yeah.
You got a 16th that way. And I was like, I love these questions because they allow for this variation of like approach and problem solving. That's what the point was. But I know some people were like angry at these questions because they've never seen that. My kids have never seen questions before where you haven't got all of the parts clearly displayed. And it's like, well, I hate to say it, but that's not really a fault of the test.
No.
Is it? That, that's maybe a lack of representation that, you haven't provided your children through problem solving. I don't know. There's something to learn from it, I think.
Yeah.
All right. I think we've had a really good breakdown of those tests there. I think the generic overview is good tests, tricky mark scheme sometimes, a bit harsh on our kids. But Sophie, what do we do now? So we've got your analysis. We've got all the tests back. What do we do with it? Why is it useful as teachers for us to have this information? What do we do next?
I think firstly, when you're starting year 6 next year, it's really helpful for your long-term plan. So especially in something like maths, making sure that you don't have to cram everything in before maths. So if you're going to prioritize some areas, it's really helpful to know which areas you're going to prioritize. And then when you do any kind of interim assessments, you're going to know which areas you want your children to really nail down. So if they haven't nailed down the calculations, their FTP from previous years, you know that that's going to be a priority. Similar for GPS is the kind of things that they need to have secured. And if they haven't secured some of the other ones yet, it's not the end of the world. But also for a bit of test prep, it's just, I think it's kind of useful to know what hasn't come up yet. So again, for example, in maths scale, I mean, I know maybe that's not the best advice because I've been saying look at poems and that still hasn't come up, but I just like to be mindful of it. And I know we didn't really cover the spelling, but there are certain spelling rules that come up a lot, and so making sure you keep focus on those as you go throughout the year, because they're much more likely to appear, or they haven't appeared in a while, and so therefore you might expect them to appear. So it's just good to be mindful of. And I'm not saying teach the test at all, but again, like the arithmetic, if you know what's coming up in the arithmetic, which we do because it's the same every single year, then you can prepare your kids adequately and make sure they've got enough confidence to go into the test with all the information that they need.
Amazing. And we're going to put in the show notes something you put together for schools to deliver. I think in general, if we want to actually get a deep dive into using this information, this analysis, and where to go from here. So you've spent some time putting together some slides. Am I right in thinking? Yeah.
So the blogs are obviously quite meaty and take a lot of time to read and digest. So if anyone did want to deliver that information to staff, particularly subject leads, so maths subject lead, English subject lead, then we've made some CPD slides with LBQ. So they have the kind of highlights of the blog. So none of the qualitative discussion, none of my opinions on there. It's just the data, the cold data.
Perfect.
You can interpret it how you want, use it how you want, but you can deliver that to staff. It's got the tables on there and it's got the bullet points of analysis, just quantitative analysis. And so it's much easier to deliver to staff rather than read this blog or here's my interpretation of the blog. So hopefully it'll be much easier to interpret and deliver.
Oh, that sounds perfect. I think as a maths lead, I'd be downloading them and using them straight away. Why waste my time doing it again when I can just use yours? Because it's going to be better than mine anyway as well. Let's just face it. Yeah, that sounds good.
Just play this podcast for an hour for some CPD.
Leave that on. No, I think maybe we should do that. Let's download the links. There's the links in our show notes.
Yeah,
good stuff.
Definitely
check it out.
Thank you so much, Sophie. I'll always love chatting with you. Third appearance on the pod. That is taking the lead.
And we're going to have to do more because we still had stuff we didn't talk about in this. We had to cut this a bit short, really. So we'll have to get you back.
If you have me on.
Fine.
Yeah. How many can we get to before it gets awkward?
17, I reckon.
17? Very specific. Yeah, not 18.
14 more to go.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you.
If you got this far into this episode and you haven't yet followed us, why not do that? Leave us a review as well. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, it really helps us out. And I think, Hayden, we're going to see these guys next week, right?
We are going to see you all next week, aren't we? And don't forget, download Sophie's amazing CPD slides to use in your school in the show notes of this episode.
See you later.